Welcome to Kodak's History of Video Games. My name is Tyler Osby.
And I'm Mike Coletta.
And this week, we have a special guest. We have Michael Greenhut, the author of A Selective History of Bad Video Games. He's also written for a daily science fiction and fantasy magazine. So we're excited to have you here, Michael.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
Awesome.
So I guess the first question that we should just get right into it, right, Tyler? We should just go for it.
Yeah, just jump right in.
Why did you decide to write a book about bad video games?
Well, I had all these games that I played growing up that were sort of frustrating, but kind of fun to play, and I just kept coming back to them over and over. I'd rent them a lot. I'd even buy some of them, and then my son, I would show them to him, and there was just sort of like a quirkiness about them that I liked, and inventiveness. And I just thought to myself, I have a lot to say about these games. And instead of writing another book about everyone's favorite games of the 80s and 90s, why not write one about games that are a little bit lesser known, that may have kind of just not had a legacy, or for whatever reason disappeared, but that some people might remember.
I can appreciate that because there are a lot of games that are sort of famous for how bad they are, and there are a couple in the book like E.T. and the Pac-Man for the Atari 2600. But I like covering these other because there's a lot of just bad games that just we never hear about because they were bad. Everybody forgot about them. We moved on.
Well, E.T. wasn't terrible. Like I guess it ended up appearing that way. But if there was a simple fix that they could have done if Howard Scott Warside had more time, would be to just make the collision around the feet. I think it would have been a lot more playable. You're not falling into pits all the time.
Yeah. That's one thing that I love as I was going through this book of the things that how could we have made this game better? Like some of them were just right on the edge there. They were not actually that bad. And I really appreciated that. So yeah, so I guess what is your favorite bad video game then?
That's hard to say, but I would say in that book, my favorite of that selection was Crystallis, but I kind of cheated. I don't really think that's a bad video game at all, but I used the criteria of, well, this game didn't do as well as it should have. Only a small percentage of cult followers remember it, people like me. And why didn't it do better? What might have gone wrong? Yeah. So I just threw it in there because I wanted to write about it.
So that actually kind of leads right into the next question then. So what makes a game qualify for this book? You just said you had criteria in particular. Did you have okay, I'm looking for these specific things?
Yeah, there's three basic criteria off the top of my head that I use. One of them was it was just that horrible. Probably Pit Fighter for Super Nintendo, I would say, is among the worst in there. Life of Black Tiger. The games are just so awful that they had to go in there. I would feel like I was cheating people if I didn't put it in there. The second criteria is if they may have gotten a good overall score, but within the fan base, they were the least liked that I've seen in the collection, like Suikoden 4, for example. Like a lot of the fans I know really hate on 4, and it wasn't my favorite either. So I figured I could use that as a criteria. And then the third are games like my favorite, Crystallis, that I think were really good games, and for some reason just didn't survive, didn't have a legacy, and I try to figure out why.
Gotcha. So you're on your second point there of games that are within the fan base, not loved as much. I have a bone to pick with you on that, I guess, because but now that you've described your criteria, makes a lot more sense why this game is in there. I came in here gloves on, I'm ready to defend Final Fantasy II because I don't think that's a bad game. It is not in the upper end of the series though, and yeah, it's probably. You probably rank it last if you were ranking the whole series.
I mean, we're talking about the real Final Fantasy II, right? The Japanese one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the villains I'd say were probably the most immature of the villains that I've seen, especially in the early Final Fantasies. You got these mustache twirling emperors, ready to just they have no depth to them at all. But the system, the exploits were fun, and I'll say that much. You just level up by beating yourself up.
Yeah, I saw that and I was like, this guy's putting this game on the same list as E.T. and Pac-Man, Atari 2600. But with that criteria in mind, makes a lot more sense now. I'm less heated about it.
Hey, I'm playing that one right now, and I'm trying to find the good in things too. So.
Yeah, it's not the best. Like, I won't defend it as a great Final Fantasy game, but I will defend it as an okay game.
I think we're all just glad Tyler took his boxing gloves off.
Yeah, so just put him down on the ground. I'm calming down now. So you described growing up in an era before the internet would hate on games, like sort of this pre-internet era. So can you describe your personal gaming history? Like, do you think the modern age of video games being just absolutely destroyed online is better or worse than it was back then?
I don't even consider myself having growing up without any internet, because like I'm the Generation X, the very tail end, 1978. So I was kind of a preteen when modems became a thing, and then I really got into dial-up bulletin board services like Prodigy, where we would trade Game Genie codes and discussions of different role video games. I was in some Final Fantasy IV fan clubs on there, and so there was like there was still people hating on games and loving on games across internet media, but it didn't have the propagation that, say, Facebook or Twitter or all that stuff have. I think there's just been more of it now. I don't think it's necessarily better or worse.
Gotcha. And it would be like, I would assume that it was more of the like super fans, because like if you were a big enough fan of a thing to be on the internet and in the special areas for that specific thing, you probably had some thoughts about stuff. Whereas now anybody can just grab a bad game on Steam, leave a bad review, and like contribute to the zeitgeist, right?
Yeah, it's much easier.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
So in the introduction, you describe the book as, and I quote it here as, quote, a book full of psychoanalytical and imaginative nostalgia, and where we laugh at the bad stuff and praise the good stuff in these games. It's like, what makes you want to celebrate these? Like, why do you think it's important to celebrate these games?
Well, I think they're more interesting. Quirks are fun enough that they should be brought up and not forgotten. And they're also very good examples of what not to do when you're making games, like as my little bits of game design comments come in here and there for some of them.
Gotcha. Does that help you in your career as a game developer? You mentioned there that you make games as well. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I develop mostly kind of casual games or small games for, like, I'm a contractor now, a freelancer, but most of the work I do is for a company that makes games for private clients or educational systems or even scientists sometimes. Not games that you're going to find like reviewed on Kotaku, people talking about the frame rate or anything like that, but like, games about the Revolutionary War. We have something called Revolutionary Choices that's on the App Store, like small scale games like that. And I'm not a game designer per se, not formally. I'm a programmer, but I've developed a lot of instincts about kind of game design, watching the people I work with, learning from things that go right and wrong, thinking about what I might do and how some other existing games don't work out in ways that they could have worked out if they were done differently.
Mm-hmm. I can relate with that a little bit. I work. I'm not a developer myself. I work at a games company in a non-game making role, but I work a lot with people who make games and like learning just the way that they think about that kind of stuff. Like, it gives me a little bit of like I can look at something happening online and be like, here's what I think I would have done, and no.
Yeah, it's definitely an instinct that you hone, especially after like 10 plus years in the industry.
Yeah, exactly.
So with you mentioned the games that you've made. There was one I was lurking on your website, Michael. Okay, I'm just gonna be honest. And I looked at one it's called EC. It's a parody of ET. Do you want to describe like what made you make that game and the process behind it? Because I was just it's EC the extra cartridges is the full name.
Yeah. Oh, that was just an Atari Age discussion. We were talking about ET, and I just got inspired. I had just made this other game. It was like a remake of Atlantis. I spent about 3 months of part-time work doing that, just a little fun side game, nothing too ambitious. And then we got to talking about it. I posted the idea about it. A lot of people found it hilarious, including Howard Scott Warsaw himself looked at it and praised it after I made it. It took me about 2 weeks. But yeah, it was just about as simple as that. basic discussion online.
And then what do you, can you describe what happens in the game too? Because it's pretty great.
Oh yeah, you play Howard Scott Warsaw roaming around the New Mexico desert, collecting ET cartridges and other random pieces of equipment to like build as outdoor kiosk. And you have to avoid Ray Kassar coming after you and confiscating your stuff. You know, he's like the scientist figure from ET, the ET game, kind of.
I love it. I love it so much.
And you can escape the hole. If you fall in a hole, you can escape by summoning a Yar and getting pulled out.
Nice.
That's great. And yeah, that's like that's on itch.io. So if any of our listeners want to check it out, you can just go ahead and look there.
And it's free, totally free.
Yeah.
Does it have proper hitboxes so that it's just the feet? Did you make that change, or did you stick to the?
Oh yeah. No, I wouldn't torture anybody with terrible hitboxes, especially when it's so easy to make in Unity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So actually, that kind of because I'm going to kind of go off script here a little bit, but I know in the book you talk about ET being like the one that's the bad video game that everyone knows, right? Why do you think it's still important to like you included it in your book, but why do you think it's still important to talk about, even though it's kind of been like thrown into the mud at this point in this game?
Well, two reasons. One, that I feel like if I didn't talk about that, people would pick up a game about bad video games and also feel cheated. Like, wait, why isn't ET in here? What's wrong with this guy? And also, I wanted to mentioning the good things about it, was I thought was also important. How it could have been fixed with some small tweaks, and why it wasn't the programmer's fault. But of course, I read Howard Scott Warsaw's book, Once Upon a Atari, between the time I started the book and when I finished it. So he's definitely got a lot more to say about it than I do, having been the guy who made it.
Do you think with those small fixes that the game would not have been such an example of, because it's often cited as like the downfall of the industry in the 80s, and like, do you think like that still would have happened, or are we just is ET just a scapegoat that we would have found another game to be the scapegoat for that industry crash?
It's a scapegoat, probably. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to do with a small amount of controls, but it still might have been a little hard to learn to play, even with the hitbox right. But I think it would have been better. And like I believe the programmer when he said that a lot of bad business decisions and a lot of ignorance about how the industry was run at the time, because it was so new, were really what went into the downfall of the industry.
I just want to say I appreciate that you call it the Troll 2 of video games in the book. I think it's a good reference for it.
Solid reference. Are there any games in the book that didn't make the cut that you wish you could have added? Because there's a lot of games in here, but are there any that you missed or that you wish you could have?
I was thinking about that. I kind of regret doing Suikoden 4 instead of Suikoden Tierkris, the game, the DS version, because I liked that game a lot less. But the fans were kind of leaning toward the fans that I knew were kind of leaning toward 4 as being the one that had a really black mark on it. And I feel like I had to research some extra games beyond the ones that I knew. Like I'd never played Tax Avoiders or anything like that. So I'm sure I could find others if I took the time to, but as it stands, I'm pretty happy with it.
Were there any games that you came across in this, like you said, so some of these games you hadn't played before, were there any that you came across you were like, wow, I had no idea this game was this bad, or hey, actually playing this game 30 years after, it was okay? Were there any that surprised you, I guess?
I would say, yeah, all the fighting games that I played were pretty terrible. Pit Fighter probably wins for the worst one, with Shaq Fu being a close second. But one game that surprised me as being not as bad as I thought was Balls 3D.
Okay.
Just because I thought the pseudo 3D physics, and the being able to like smash the bodies and have them reform, and all the wackiness was kind of cool and interesting.
Nice. So I kind of want to take a moment to talk about this, because I feel like a lot in the book is about like the sheer creativity at the time of these games. Like you mentioned, like Atari, you could kind of do whatever you want at the time, and that's where we get games like Cosmic Arc and Tax Avoiders that have very different premises than what we would see today. And I mean, obviously we have like indie games doing this still, but in bigger, like giant studios, do you think we could ever see them taking a chance on something like this today? And can you describe what makes that age of experimentation at Atari so unique for its time?
I'd like them to take a chance. I don't know if anybody would, but there's a lot of. I think from what I traded emails with Rob Fulop at one point. He's the developer of Cosmic Arc. I was probably not too happy with me about putting his game in a book titled Bad Video Games, but even though I did like it, but he said that there was not much of a marketing department back then in the industry, and so things just kind of like anything they thought of, or I guess almost anything the developers thought of, could kind of get out there. Today, everything is like, can I sell this, or will this sell?
Yeah.
Now, I've worked on games like Real Housewives, Hidden Objects, and random stuff in my career. Well, that seems to be the primary focus, and the marketing team's a lot stronger, and they're going to veto anything that they think probably won't sell. I guess because there's more games, there's more technology out there, it's a bigger industry, harder competition, and like I mean, I would like to make I was only half kidding about my idea for Cooking Mama 2030, the final cook. Like I would do that if I got funded, but like that kind of thing would never happen today.
Yeah. I kind of think that in those days there was a difference because games were so new and nobody even knew what a good game looked like too. You know, it was just like everybody just makes something and then I guess we'll find out if it's good later because like there just was nothing to compare anything to, you know?
Yeah, it was a totally new industry. Nobody knew really how to market it that well or how to handle it when it went bad.
I have a little side question that just popped in my brain. So, do you have, because you talk about some of the programming languages and how like hard it was, right? Because like now with Unity, it's a lot easier to program. Like even the hitboxes you just mentioned, it's a lot easier. Do you have
Yeah.
like a favorite, like a nostalgic programming language that you would always want to program in if you could?
I grew up programming in VIC-20 Basic and then GW Basic. I wasn't very good at it, but that's one language I kind of just I've taught my son a little bit of it just for fun. But in terms of actual career programming, I kind of miss programming. I miss programming in ActionScript 3, the Flash language.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And everybody hates on Flash because it hogged memory, it was inefficient, but it was fun to program in.
I mean, it was like that was kind of my childhood of like playing games on Flash. You know, that was just so. I'm very nostalgic for that time, so that makes me happy to know it was like a fun time for people to design games in too. That's
Yeah,
exciting.
well, even with all the inefficiencies and downsides of Flash, like there's a reason it was so popular, right? And I think ActionScript is probably one of them because
Yeah, it was pretty uniform across browsers with some minor issues, but you didn't have to worry about, does this browser do it this way? Does that browser do it that way? Like you do with HTML.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite games in the book? And this can be favorite because they're bad or favorite because they weren't as bad. Like just you use your own criteria for your favorites, I guess.
Crystallis is one because that's probably my favorite Nintendo game. The first game that really moved me with its story. Suikoden 4, of all the games in there, that's probably one of the least bad because I'm just a huge fan of the Suikoden series, and I would look for any excuse to write about those games. And let me think. Yeah, like you said, any Final Fantasy game is going to have a baseline fun quotient to it. Even Final Fantasy 2.
Even the Mystic Quests and the other ones that are in there too.
Yeah, even those. I mean, Final Fantasy 4, the after years, I liked it because I'm a huge fan of 4, but I can definitely see why the average role-playing gamer would be turned off by it.
Yeah.
I have a side question about a game in this book.
Mm-hmm.
Did you beat the damn level on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Nintendo game?
I beat it with. You could say I beat it. I had to cheat. I had to use save states, but and I do own the cartridge, so. Yeah, there was this crazy floor where I think it was all spikes near the end.
Oh
And
yeah.
everybody talks about the water level being hard, but those spikes it's impossible to pass them without losing half your health.
Yeah, I think I got past the dam level as a kid, and then I would always die in like the third part of it after that because I used all my lives to get through the dam level. I was just like curious how you did it because I didn't. I mean, I haven't played it since I played it on Nintendo, so I haven't tried
Yeah.
it again now. Is it worth trying as an adult? Do you think? Is it worth going back?
For historical purposes, it has some interesting qualities that you don't see in the modern Ninja Turtles games. Like even Shredder's Revenge, which is a great game on its own, it's still a pretty much a straight up action game with a veneer of adventure with like the map screen. Like you go from level to level, you do this little bit of side quests, but it's still pretty linear. Whereas the Nintendo game had a sort of an adventuring non-linear quality to it. You can go back and forth wherever you want, go back to different levels, rescue your comrades, stuff like that.
Yeah, it was kind of unique in that way. I'm always curious. Anytime someone brings up that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game with the dam level, I'm like, I need to know. Also, that's been recommended as a topic on our podcast, so I might go back to it anyway for future episodes. But back to the questions here. One aspect I love about the book is that you describe fixes for these games a lot of the times. Like at the end of it, you talk about how it could be fixed. And like, how did you think of these fixes? Was it just like playing the game, or was there like a moment like with your programming background that you could be like, oh, like the hitbox collider for the ET was just like a thought for you? Like, how did you figure that out?
Yeah, I can't remember if I read about Howard Scott Warsaw's solution about the hitbox collider first, or if I thought of that first, or if I thought of it just as I was reading that, or something like that. But it's a generally known problem with that game. But I would say that most of these ideas just came from the natural instinct of having made games for over 10 years. And I didn't find any particularly, although I mean there's a couple of games that are just really hard. I don't know if they have any hope to them, like Life of Black Tiger,
Yeah.
Pit Fighter, Super Nintendo version. I don't know about those, but
that's the real silver lining you got to find to make those games, like how you make those games good.
play the arcade game for Pit Fighter instead of the Super Nintendo game. That's all I can say. Yeah.
So the one game that really stood out to me reading this book was the Pinball Quest, because like the idea of a pinball RPG is just such an interesting genre matchup, and especially that it came in 1989. Like, did you have a personal history with the game before you wrote the book, or did you find out about it as you were researching and playing games?
Yeah, that's one of the games I rented as a kid. I played on
Oh,
Super
wow.
Nintendo or play on regular Nintendo rather, because it was just interesting and different, like a pinball role-playing game. It's like, wow, what's this? And then later on, I realized that that was actually one of the easiest games to think of ways that I could improve it, or that I would improve it if I were to remake it.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I was this book also got me nostalgic for game rentals again. I gotta say, feeling that way.
Yeah, those were fun.
It's the pinball RPG. Does that feel like maybe a predecessor to like the like Mario Golf RPG that's on the Game Boy Color? Like those kinds of like or Golf Story, I think is one of those. There's a few games that are like sports based, but like also weirdly RPGs.
I'm trying to think. There was some weird sports games I included. The Bill Lambert's Combat Basketball. Well, that doesn't have any real RPG elements, but you can fight in there.
The Mega Man Soccer game.
Mega Man Soccer, yeah.
Pinball Quest sounds to me like the first sort of like mashup of like Mike was talking about, this mashup between like pinball sort of sporty thing with RPGs. And there are other games that are like that now, that like the Mario Golf game for Game Boy Color, or more recently, I want to say, what was the one by Supergiant?
Oh yeah, yeah, I think I have that one.
Yeah, was it? Dang, I can't remember.
It's not Hades. It's
it's the other one right before it, Hob, or is that a different? Maybe I'm thinking something else, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like a medieval, like you play a sports game in the underworld. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Someone is screaming it into their like car right now, just yelling. Yeah. I'm looking through their games right now. Pyre.
That's it. Yeah.
That's what it was. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that question. I just thought it was interesting that there are more games like that in that similar mashup style now. So if there's a connection there, but I can't make it.
With that in mind, Michael, like, because you see like all these games that are kind of unique back then, have you thought about taking one of these and just kind of trying to make it modern?
I did that with, well, not with any of the games in this book, but I did it with Atlantis. The I kind of mashed up the Intellivision and Atari versions. I jokingly threatened to do that with my one idea of Cooking Mama 2030. I doubt I would actually spend the time and energy to do that unless some crazy person actually wanted to pay me for that and pay my legal defense in court. But
okay, well, here's the hypothetical then. If someone's like, Michael, I'm gonna pay you $1 million to remake one of these games from this book, which one would you do?
probably Crystalis, because I'm actually working on a Spirit sequel to that right now. Whenever I have time, which isn't very often, but since I'm already doing something like that, that's probably the one I would pick.
I'm surprised it wasn't Life of Black Tiger. I really thought you were going to go. I'm just kidding.
Oh yeah, sorry to disappoint you there.
It's just such a weird, strange game. Yeah, it's interesting, but there's actually one thing I wanted to talk about here because you talk about like some of these games that are actually really impressive from like a technological standpoint at the time, and you mentioned Pac-Man 2600 and how their ghost sprites work and that like twinning that you talk about. Can you describe that just to the listener, like how it works from like a technological standpoint? Because I thought it was really interesting, and I wanted you to explain it again because it was. I want to know more about it.
Oh yeah, well, I am by no means an expert on 6502 assembly language. I've dabbled in it a little bit. I learned enough to move a sprite around the screen, but the way it worked overall was that they were, let's see, about 5 sprite registers in the entire game. Yeah, there's a player one. There's a couple of player registers. There was a for paddles, and then there was a there was a ball sprite and a couple of missile sprites. And so what the engineers had to do is like they had to take one sprite and just sometimes make it look like 4 sprites by spreading it out over the frame rate. Like they would have it appear one place in one frame, another place in another frame, a third place in the next frame, and just keep cycling it like that. And it was pretty crazy.
Yeah, you described it as like it's rapidly teleporting back and forth, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, because if you pause the game, you can see that like half the ghosts disappear, at least when I pause in the emulator. But
there's also like a cosmic arc. You said that he accidentally discovered a star background and he just left it in. And I like this, like it's kind of like a book of happy accidents in a way. It's really cool.
Yeah, best inventions happen by accident.
Yeah. So I actually feel like the book is great because I mean personally I was reading it and I was like, now I really want to play some of these games. If you could recommend one game from the book, which game would you want readers to play?
I would want them to play, you might have guessed this by now, Crystalis. Right. I would recommend a different Suikoden game from the one I covered. If they were into that, wanted to look at that series, I'd recommend 2, not 4.
Can you jump into 2 without having played the first one? That's a series I've always had my eye on that I'm like thinking about.
Yeah, it helps to know some of the characters and references from the first one, especially. And if you load save data from the first game, you can actually play a character in the second game that you otherwise wouldn't get. But it does kind of have its own self-contained story that is separate from the first one.
Okay, good to know.
So are you like genre-wise, are you a big JRPG person? Is that your kind of your jam as far as games go?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Nice. So that like that kind of leads into our next big segment, the way we kind of end our podcast here, which is what you've been playing. So we'll go Tyler and I first, and then we'll end with you with what you've been playing. Okay, Michael. So Tyler, what you been playing?
Well, I'm back into Final Fantasy 14. Back on that train, making my way through Endwalker. Other than that, I've been working through Kingdom Hearts. This is a game I played like a bunch of times, but I've never played it on the proud difficulty, which is like the hard mode difficulty, and I've never sort of attempted a 100% run on it to try to get everything. And I don't know if I'm gonna finish that 100% run this time, but I've been having a lot of fun playing it online. Mike, you've been watching me play too, and
I've been watching you play it. I've been loving that. It's like watching Twitch, but it's a personal Twitch stream. That's what it feels like. And I'm
just hopping on Discord and we're just playing with some buddies. That's been a lot of fun. And because I played it so many times, I don't need to like pay attention to the story, and we're just having fun, kind of lovingly goofing on that game because it is very strange, but I love it, and the gameplay is very solid. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been what I've been playing. What about you, Mike?
Well, nothing makes me happier than watching you play that game and there's like a serious moment and then you turn around and Donald Duck and Goofy are standing next to you. So that whole like the balancing act between that is impressive. So I actually got back into 2 games again. I'm playing Divinity Original Sin 2 because I was like kind of feeling the D&D CRPG kind of mood, so I started playing that again and I've gotten pretty far. And the other thing that I've been playing, and it just came back, I got it in the mail. I ordered the Advanced Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp, which is very much like a childhood nostalgia for me because I loved the first Advanced Wars. And they've completely redone it, and they've redone the animations and redone like the cutscenes in between. And you get a lot of game for what you're paying for because there's campaign mode, right? There's now online multiplayer. And then on the Game Boy, there were these war rooms, which are like these side maps that you could play against the computer, like challenge mode. They've put all of the war room maps in there and then some from both games. So I got a lot of Advance Wars ahead of me, is what I'm telling you. So yeah, I'm really loving that. And I've been just kind of playing that in my spare time too. And it's nice being on Switch too, because I could just like lay around and play it like handheld, and I'm really enjoying that. So but that's been really fun. But Michael, what have you been playing?
Well, this leads into the next book that I'm writing, which is called Villains of Final Fantasy.
I'm so excited for this book.
So yeah. So what I'm doing is I bought the Pixel Remaster Collection on Switch. No, I didn't want to get another system, but my son wanted one, so we got it, and now we both have games on there.
That's awesome, though.
Yeah, and I'm playing through some of the Pixel remasters, at least the ones that I haven't played very recently, and just studying the villains, such as they are in some of these games, and just writing about what I see. I had written another book called Video Game Villains, which I was trying to shop around. Didn't really work out yet, and then my current publisher suggested this as an alternative. So I'm just taking some of that material and writing some new material from these games and putting them all in this book.
Awesome. What's your favorite Final Fantasy?
My favorite would have to be 4.
4, okay. Good choice. Solid choice.
Yeah, 4, and I would say 4 through 7 are the ones that are all probably the crux of the series, but I haven't played as many of the later games yet.
But
I'm going
sounds like you'll get to them, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Do you have any villains that you like are really standing out to you right now that you're like, oh, I can't wait to write about this?
I wrote about Golbez and Kefka and Sephiroth already. So there's like the 3. They're really like the trifecta of early Final Fantasy villains that I see. So I'm kind of excited to work that into this book.
Nice. So with your son, do you play like a lot of games together? What games do you play together?
Oh yeah, I showed him Final Fantasy IV. We played through Final Fantasy VI. We're playing through the original Mana trilogy right now. Though he's getting a little bit impatient with fighting all the Benevodons at the end of the third one.
So is it like he plays and then you're like helping him through it, the Final Fantasy guide?
Yeah, or those games we can play together. The Mana games we can play together, but the original Final Fantasy games for 4 and 6, yeah, he's just playing them and I'm advising him.
That's awesome. I wish I had a advisor when I played JRPGs. That sounds great.
Yeah, I didn't have anyone that age.
Play him on Discord, Mike. I'll be your advisor.
I will. I'll do that. I played Final Fantasy VIII as a kid, not realizing that when I leveled up, I was making the game very hard for myself, and I never beat it because of that. So I kind of wish I had a guide.
Oh yeah, that's one of those games where the system is really the main hurdle of that one. It's like the story is decent enough, it's like kind of like the Jane Austen Pride and Prejudice of Final Fantasy games, but like the system's just, it's like you level up over and over and you wonder why you're not doing anything, and then suddenly you put on a bunch of magic spells into your weapon and then all of a sudden you're wrecking the enemies. I'm like, oh, like okay.
Yeah, and then if you do that without leveling up, then suddenly you wreck them even harder than before.
Yeah.
I know, because that's the point of the game, right? You don't level up your character; you just do the magic spells and just keep going.
Yeah, but you're not. They don't tell you that. Like that's not a thing that you're like supposed to know. You're not like dumb if you can't figure that out.
Well, you overtly level up. But levels are almost like cosmetic. I don't even know what they do.
Yeah, they just make the game harder. Like if you fight the final boss at level 5 versus being level 100, it's much harder if you're level 100.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
It's so weird. There's like when I did my playthrough of that game, I spent like an inordinate amount of time getting the EXP, the thing that makes it so you don't gain any EXP or turn off random encounters, basically. Because like modern versions of that game, I think you can just turn off random encounters, but there was an actual like path to getting an item or a power that let you turn off random encounters, and that makes the game much easier because then you never fight anything along the way, and bosses don't give you any experience in that game either. So as you make your way through the story, you're not even like organically leveling up from bosses either.
It still wasn't as hard as Seventh Saga though.
No.
So okay, I'm Michael. I'm sure you've gathered it by now. I'm kind of a Final Fantasy newbie, right? That's the only Final Fantasy game I played was 8, and I had a hard experience. It was bad. So, do you recommend this Switch like collection that you got? Is that a good way to play it?
I would say so. If you're okay with pixel art games and the old style.
Love pixel art.
Yeah, like 4 through 6 is really the crux. I mean, I'd say 4 and 6 have the strongest stories. 5 has kind of a cool system, and then the others are really cool for historical reasons.
Nice. I'll give that a go sometime for sure. But yeah, that's kind of the interview today, though. Thank you so much for being on the show, Michael. We really enjoyed having you here. It was
great.
Yeah,
thank you. Thanks for having
me. And then we'd love to have you back when you got your villains book all ready to go and talk about that. That'd be fantastic.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, the book once again is called A Selective History of Bad Video Games through White Owl Publishing.
Bad's in quotes.
Bad is in quotes. Yes, it's in quotes. It's good to note. It's bad's in quotes. It's out now. You can go ahead and pick it up now anywhere you get books.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you again, Michael. And as always, if you want to help support our podcast, you can go to codexpodcast.net. Everything's on there. You can email us. You can join our Discord. You can see Tyler and I's Trello boards of all the games we haven't played that we're embarrassed about. But with that, you want to say bye to everybody, Tyler?
Goodbye, everybody.